Welcome, everyone, to the third in our series of Insulin to Innovation events. I'm Krista Lamb, and I will be your host tonight. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on as the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. As we may have viewers from across Canada and beyond, may we suggest that you research the history of your land using the website and app native-land.ca. So tonight we will be talking about diabetes and exercise, which is a really, really interesting topic with a lot happening right now. If you have questions, I hope you'll submit them. We have a great guest to answer them for you. And you can submit your questions in the chat box or the comments, or you can do that via Twitter at RCI Science, or you can email them to information@rciscience.ca. A reminder to be polite and respectful. There will be moderators looking into the chat and taking action as appropriate. So it is my extreme pleasure to welcome Dr. Dessi Zaharieva from Stanford University as my guest tonight. We'll be discussing her work in the area of diabetes and exercise. I first met Dessi when she was finishing her PhD in the lab of Dr. Michael Riddell at York University, and I was thrilled to be able to profile her in my book, Beyond Banting. Dessi is a scientist, an athlete, and an amazing inspiration to those who, like her, live with type 1 diabetes. Welcome. It's so great to have you here.
Hi, Krista. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, let's get started. We'll talk a little bit about what inspired your work in diabetes and exercise.
Yeah, that's always a tricky question because you have to think back to I've had diabetes for 25 years. So many different moments impacted my life and why I chose to do research and why I wanted to study type 1 diabetes. A lot of it actually stemmed from a personal struggle, a personal challenge around managing my blood sugars during Taekwondo, which was my sport growing up that I played, and a lot of challenges around managing blood glucose during exercise, hypoglycemia after exercise, particularly overnight. And so from those personal struggles and realizing that, I had a great team of diabetes providers and endocrinologists that took care of me, but a lot of the focus wasn't around exercise. It was about my day-to-day management. So some of that was my passion of why I wanted to study diabetes. And then along the way, just people that came into my path, like Dr. Mike Riddell, one of my biggest inspirations, doing the best work out there on diabetes and exercise and trying to understand this challenging concept of how to manage blood sugars around exercise. I would say those are some of my biggest inspirations.
Yeah, and you mentioned the work that you did with Mike Riddell, which is at York University, incredible work being done there. But now you're at Stanford and you're looking a little bit more at pediatrics. So you went from sort of looking at competitive athletes to looking at kids. And I wondered why the switch.
Absolutely. I think for me, one of the biggest reasons for switching was one, I wanted to explore a different area. I had done my master's and my PhD at York University. For me, I wanted to branch out, build a new team and collaborators and get to know other people. For me, the network and the community in diabetes is so important. Going to the United States was a big change for me, even understanding, insulin coverage, understanding healthcare, understanding pediatrics for me was such an interest because although most of my work was in adults with type 1 diabetes, going to pediatrics was just an area that I knew a lot less about in terms of research. Of course, I had been a child with type 1 diabetes and knew the challenges and just wanted to step into that field, really just help out as much as I could.
And for kids with diabetes, if we start them off early with exercise and help them to learn to live healthy lives, I would think that would set them off in a really good path for their diabetes long term. So is that something that you're looking at?
That is exactly what I'm looking at, Krista. It's like you took the words out of my mouth. So one of my current projects that I'm actually funded for by the Helmsley Charitable Trust is to incorporate exercise education at new onset diagnosis. So from, the start of diagnosis, we know that there's a lot of information being thrown at families to learn how to manage a new condition. We are starting families on continuous glucose monitoring within the first around 10 days of diagnosis, get them started on CGM. We know that there is a lot of benefit of being able to see glucose levels kind of continuously. And on top of that, we also know that intensive insulin adjustments are also needed at early diagnosis. So one of the reasons that I came to Stanford also was to add on to this idea of continuous glucose monitoring at early onset diagnosis and also incorporate exercise education. That was one piece to me that felt like it was missing. And it's just the area that I care about more than anything, to help people manage their blood sugars during exercise. If we don't know how to do that, we may build some barriers around physical activity if we don't know how to manage glycemia around exercise. And so for me, that was sort of the reason of getting started at Stanford, incorporating exercise education at new onset and just providing the knowledge and resources from as early as possible.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned earlier that you were an athlete growing up, but just for anyone listening who doesn't know, she was more than an athlete. You were on Team Canada for Taekwondo. You did extraordinary things, and you've been this huge inspiration for so many kids. I know that you've spoken to the D-Skate kids, and you've spoken to the York Sports Camp kids about how they can incorporate exercise into their lives safely and your journey. And I wanted to ask what you learned from them, because you got a really great chance with those groups to get to know some really great young athletes. Does anything that they taught you factor into your work now?
Oh my gosh, they are the reason and kind of the drive behind what I do, because all of these kids, whether it's D-Skate or the York Sports Camp, they're like a family to me. I think for me, I was working at the York Sports Camp for over 6 years. D-Skate was also many years that I've been involved in that camp. And for me, it's just seeing how far these kids can push themselves. For me, I was always so fearful and worried around exercise and blood glucose, and these kids just break down all of these barriers from, as soon as I meet them, they are doing extraordinary things at such a young age and are always just so excited to learn. And they're also just incredible athletes too. Seeing these kids getting out there, like for hockey, I think hockey is an incredible sport. That's one of the things I never got a chance to learn and play. So for me, I still do a lot of the exercise education around hockey, but it's just one of the sports that really inspires me that these kids do.
Yeah, and I think it's such a great thing because I get the chance in my role to talk to so many people with diabetes. And one of the things I hear a lot is about something that you have researched quite a bit, which is that fear of how your blood sugars are going to react when you exercise, because it's not always predictable. And even if you use technologies, it might not always be predictable. So people have this fear, but exercising is really important. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about your work in that area and how you're teaching people that it's okay to exercise and that you don't necessarily have to be afraid of it.
Absolutely. One of the biggest questions, right? How do we answer this? I think another thing that's really important to note is understanding whether it is a fear of hypoglycemia or a fear of it could be hyperglycemia, any dysglycemia around exercise, or just a risk of that occurring. It may not be a fear, but just knowing that that's an added risk by exercising and trying to figure out how to accommodate it, how to adjust so we can avoid kind of this high blood sugar or low blood sugar around exercise. So for me, first and foremost, it's understanding where these families are coming into the, exercise scene with diabetes. Are they actually worried about hypo and hyperglycemia? Is it just a barrier? Because it's something that we all have to think about with diabetes. Whether it's actually a fear, it may just mean it's something that we have to pre-plan for and always think about. When did we last eat? When did you last take your insulin? What type of, is it going to be a practice or a game? How are you feeling that day? There's just so many factors around this. So I think that in itself kind of shows you that there are so many challenges around blood sugar management and exercise and diabetes. So for me, it's just, again, incorporating that education through my research. And outside of that, for me, being involved in nonprofit organizations, Connected in Motion, I Challenge Diabetes, any organizations that are looking to help educate around exercise and diabetes, it's sort of what I want to do to just inform as many people as possible. And again, it comes back to, I didn't have that growing up because 25 years ago, we didn't have these kind of forums and these groups and these communities. At least I wasn't aware of them when I was a kid. And so for me, just being able to get involved in as many ways as possible is what I care about.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so amazing right now. I talked to Sebastian Sasseville on the Diabetes Canada podcast this week. And of course, for those who don't know, Sebastian has climbed Mount Everest. He has cycled across Canada. He has run across Canada, all while living with type 1. And he just continues to smash through these barriers. And I think it's so wonderful that we have people who are doing these incredible, inspiring things. And one of the things we talked about is technology and how that really helps. And I know that's an area that you've looked at a lot. So how is technology now making it a little bit easier for people with diabetes to do things like, run across Canada, should they wish to do that?
I wish we could all be that amazing. He has done so many incredible things with diabetes. It's inspiring, to say the least. I think for me, one of the biggest things is that as someone that started using CGM a little bit later on in my life, because again, when I was diagnosed at 7 years old, CGM wasn't available. It wasn't something that we could just get started on. And so since I started using continuous glucose monitoring, it was actually when I was in university, I realized just having so much frequent updated information of my glucose and trends, it actually just provided me with so much more information. And I could use that information to then tailor what I was going to do, whether it meant I needed to eat a little bit before exercise, whether I needed to take a break from exercise, if my blood sugar was dropping. Just having that constant feedback and information was extremely beneficial for me. And more than just during exercise, again, going back to the overnight period, I often talk about some of my scary hypoglycemia episodes overnight that I had when I was competing for Team Canada. This was before CGM was available. I just didn't realize the risk of hypoglycemia after exercise and how it could be, 7 to 11, even 24 hours after exercise. And so for me, having CGM was just more information that I could then use to kind of make better judgment and better decisions to help manage my blood sugars. And I feel this is the same for all kids and all adults. I think, again, one thing to just touch on is, although we have all this great technology, there are some challenges around any technology that we use. And so some of my research does focus on the accuracy of these devices around exercise. We do see some reduced accuracy in technology around physical activity. So even just educating families around that, how to manage that, always having the option of doing a finger stick blood glucose when you're unsure whether the CGM is reading accurately. It's just an education tool. And again, with a lot of the publications that have recently come out, we see consensus guidelines on how to use continuous glucose monitoring during exercise, using the trend arrows to make better judgment decisions. So again, the information that's provided is incredible compared to what we used to have with just a couple of finger sticks a day.
Yeah, I know one of the most interesting conversations I had, and I think it was with you and Mike, was around the lag time, that sometimes people don't realize when they're using a technology that it might not be completely up to date, especially if they're doing a HIIT exercise or something a little more strenuous, that they might have a little bit of lag time. And so it's just being aware of that would be really helpful, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely. This was I really, really was just excited about this study that we published, because it wasn't to try and instill fear for anyone using this technology, because keep in mind, I can't imagine my life without CGM now. And so it's just giving the amount of information that we can to have it in the background in case we ever question whether the technology is working or not and what we could do about it. So particularly with rapid changes in glucose, whether that's downward trends or upward trends, for example, with a meal, we tend to see the lag time to be increased during those rapid changes in glucose. And so again, just being aware of, for example, if you see rapid changes downward during exercise, maybe testing blood sugars at rest. And then you can kind of see where continuous glucose monitoring and finger stick blood glucose are a lot closer together. And we know that the accuracy is improved. If you're unsure about what's happening during physical activity, it's just important to remember, think about how you feel and whether you actually feel like your blood sugar is low. Your CGM may not have told you that your blood sugar is low yet. And so again, it's just understanding that these challenges do occur sometimes, and it is different for different people, but it's important to kind of have that education and information to be able to use it.
Yeah, and for anyone who is listening to this or watching this and is curious, you don't have to use technologies if you want to do exercise and you live with diabetes. You can be on multiple daily injections and still be doing high impact exercise. Would that be correct? Or
Yeah, so Krista, you bring up such a great point. To me, this is also so important that technology is not the answer for everyone. I think I always bring back again that personal experience of I was on multiple daily injections without CGM for many, many years. I didn't switch to a pump because I wanted better control or because it was kind of the best option for me. I think for me, I switched to a pump for trying a new piece of technology. I was just curious and I wanted to explore that. But I do know that so many people are managing with multiple daily injections and doing very well. I think one of the really important points to pick out here is that I do think CGM has been life changing for me, but I do think the access to this technology, whether it's the cost, whether it's availability, is also one of the most important barriers to using the technology. So we can promote it as much as we can, but it ultimately comes down to a bigger systemic challenge.
Yeah, it's really interesting for me, especially talking to researchers like Dr. Alana Wiseman, who is looking at, how coverage impacts things like insulin pump use, because we know that people who don't have coverage for CGM or insulin pumps don't use them as often, which makes sense because they are not inexpensive technologies. And so that's a really, really, really good point. And so before we sort of go to our question round from the audience, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what you're working on right now. Can you tell us a little bit about a research project you're particularly excited about?
Absolutely. We've got a few kind of projects on the pipeline, but just a quick kind of summary. I think I briefly kind of touched on the idea of implementing exercise education at new onset diagnosis. So this is one of my main studies that I'm working on right now, and it's incorporating 4 education modules throughout the year and actually separating out education for parents and for children. Because for me, this is something that's never been done. We don't really know how families will take to this information at early diagnosis, what the timing and the cadence should be around providing education for exercise. And then even more so, how do we scale this idea? I'm the one leading the exercise education sessions, but I can't be everywhere and lead them worldwide. So for me, one of the next most important steps is to be able to scale this. For example, training other CDEs or diabetes educators on the team to be able to deliver the education modules as well. Being able to utilize kind of the resources that you have in clinic. And then even beyond that, being able to expand. Right now, we're doing English speaking education, but our next phase of the study is actually implementing Spanish speaking education. So for me, it's just really important to include everyone with diabetes and be able to provide this education for anyone living with type 1 diabetes.
Yeah, and that actually inspires another question, because I was speaking to someone recently about how they were doing a type 2 diabetes and exercise study, and how they had sort of developed this program and now they were implementing the program. But the problem becomes if you have to do the research and implement it, it can be really hard. So it's really interesting that you guys are thinking so much about scale up, because often it becomes the researcher running the program and then you're not really doing your research as much. So that's really interesting that that's how you guys are doing it. So
Absolutely.
Very, very cool. Awesome. Okay, so we have a question. You won't be surprised who it's from Michael Riddell. And it's, if you could be given a grant to do one more tech advancement for exercise, what would you build or do?
Oh my gosh, Mike, always asking the hard-hitting questions. I mean, I would just get the grant so Mike could do it. He does the most amazing research in diabetes. Honestly, I think there's so many questions around what we could do with exercise. We don't have the answers to a lot of these areas. We've definitely made advancements. We've improved technology, accuracy around technology. But I think for me, one of the most important things of understanding is still as advancements like hybrid closed loop systems and automated insulin delivery is becoming at the forefront and standard of care, it would be to understand how these systems can better work around exercise. To this day, we know that one of the biggest challenges is using these systems during physical activity. The algorithms are getting a lot better with meal dosing and automated delivery. But when it comes to exercise, to actually tell a system that exercise is occurring or having that to be automatically, determined by the pump is still one of the greatest challenges. And so this goes back to one of the main studies that we published while I was in Australia with Mike. And It's just implementing additional metrics into these closed loop systems, whether it's lactic acid to be determined by lactate, whether it is any of these other metrics to be incorporated into these hybrid closed loop systems. To me, that's the future. It's being able to understand what can we implement into CGM, into these hybrid closed loop systems to get these insulin pumps to eventually be fully automated systems. So yeah, I think for me, it's just to continue that advancement and understanding what metrics are most important. We still don't have that exact answer.
Awesome. That is a great answer, I think. And thank you to Mike for submitting a question. If you do have questions, pop them into the chat. We are going to do a little bit of questionable news before we take some more questions. For those of you who are not familiar, this is a very big part of the RCI Science brand. So it is a chance to give you guys some time to put some questions into the chat, but also a chance to find out how familiar you are with your media literacy. So I'm going to ask Dessi about 3 different headlines, and she will guess if they are real headlines that actually appeared in the media or if they are fake. So we'll bring up the first one. At risk of diabetes, exercise in the evening. Hitting the gym at night boosts your metabolism and makes it easier to control overnight blood sugar levels, study finds. Is it a real headline that actually appeared in the media, or is it a fake headline that we made up?
And not necessarily that I believe this, because that's where always kind of the headline is trying to get you to, but you're totally right. I think I could see this being being a headline.
Yeah, no, this is 100% a real headline. And just so those of you, and the reason we do this is to sort of remind you that just because it's in the media doesn't mean that it's actually accurate. So this was a small study of 24 men. And the study suggests that evening exercise might be more beneficial, but I don't think 24 people is going to be the final say for that. So interesting. The next one. Could a diabetes pill really be a miracle replacement for exercise?
Oh boy.
So many.
All the things you're not sure. I feel like any headlines that you have shown, I could definitely see have been put up online somewhere. You know what? This one too. I feel like I could have seen this somewhere.
Yeah. So it is real. It is, yes. Apparently there is a pill that is similar to metformin, and it is being tested. But this story was based on a book called The Miracle Pill. So, again, just a reminder from RCI Science that we need to pay attention to what we see in the media, because sometimes a headline is just a headline. And so we will do
that was the case, right? If we could take a pill to replace, but exercise is what brings us so much joy and happiness and, improved mental well-being. So for me, those are kind of the bigger questions. What type of improvements do we see?
Yeah, I will say that in researching headlines for this, it was startling to me how many things could cure diabetes. Yes. A lot of tea, a lot of pumpkin, cinnamon. A lot of, cinnamon. So just a reminder to everyone that no matter how much cinnamon you consume, you will not cure your diabetes. So let's do the third headline. Afternoon exercise best for blood sugar control in those at diabetes risk study. So apparently for those that aren't exercising at night.
Yeah, I mean, this too, there's no reason that could not be a headline that we've seen.
Yep, that one is also real. So it is a study of 32 men. And considering the methodological limitations of the present study, future human interventions, especially larger prospective randomized controlled trials, are required to confirm the present findings, according to one of the researchers. So, which I would suggest probably because, I think the big thing is if you exercise at all, it's probably good for your type 2 diabetes risk. So we'll just go with that, no matter what time of day. It's not a bad idea ever to exercise.
Absolutely. We should be exercising more, especially during a pandemic. It's a challenge for many of us.
Yeah, as someone who lost both my yoga class and my gym over the pandemic, I feel that. So let's take a few more questions. If you have a question and you want to throw it in the chat, that would be awesome. And in the meantime, I wanted to ask you about something that was really interesting to me. Recently, Dr. Michael Riddell, who we've talked about, and Patricia Brubaker developed this word cloud. And the word cloud looks at all of the researchers currently studying type 1 diabetes who live with type 1 diabetes. And I thought this was so cool because I think that we underestimate how important it is to have role models in the scientific community. And I just wondered what you think about that and why you think this sort of, I guess it's not really a study, but this sort of project is important.
Well, one, I give kudos to that work because it was amazing to just be able to see how many people living with type 1 diabetes are actually researching this as well. And so to me, that was such an inspiration to see how many others are doing this too and trying to better diabetes management, and whether it's around exercise or not. It's just incredible. That list is so big. And I know that, Mike would say this too. There's definitely others that were missed, and just the opportunity of kind of seeing that list and how much it's taught us of other people that are doing diabetes research. It made me want to look at all of these names and find out what is being studied by each of these people. So to me, it's absolutely tremendous to see that many people. But one thing I will say is that Mike also highlighted this too. When I first started doing my master's degree, Mike, living with type 1 diabetes himself, kind of mentioned that one of the challenges around researching in diabetes and living with diabetes is that you really don't have a chance to turn off. You already don't have a chance to turn off of diabetes, but when you're also researching it, it's something that's basically ingrained in your life. You eat, sleep, breathe, think about it, research it, educate it. It's basically in all aspects of your life. And so the burnout we know from diabetes alone, and researching it too just means it's an added thing that we are thinking about all the time. So again, it just kind of is inspiring to see all these other researchers living with diabetes and still continuing to push ahead and try to advance the field.
Yeah, and I was able to include that story in the book, and it's one that people talk to me about quite a bit because I think that for a lot of people who are living with the condition and studying it at the same time and so immersed in it, they felt really good knowing that, people like yourself and Mike had also thought about these things that maybe they were thinking too. So I was really, really happy that you shared that story. All right, so the next question that has come in, and I guess we only really have time for one more question, but so you competed as part of Team Canada. How did your diabetes factor into your life as a competitive athlete?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was probably one of my biggest challenges growing up. I was competing for many, many years at a high level. And so for me, just not having the technology, not having the understanding myself around how to manage my blood sugars meant that I had hospitalizations from low blood sugars. So trying to learn from that and then thinking, wow, exercise is really impacting my blood sugar levels in ways that I don't even understand. How is it impacting my metabolism, my management, all of this? And so for me, it was definitely one of the greatest challenges of being able to push to that level, but also to learn about basically my responses to exercise. And it does get easier over time. So for me, again, my biggest kind of push to learn more about this and to educate on exercise and diabetes. But to get to that level definitely meant a lot of drive and to continue to push and understand more. And still, I think one thing I just wanted to highlight is, although I was a very competitive athlete, with diabetes, my blood sugars aren't perfect all the time. So it's important to kind of remember that we all make mistakes. We all are learning every single day with diabetes. Just because I'm here researching exercise and diabetes doesn't mean that I, have perfect blood sugars 24/7. So it's something that, I learned from all of my other colleagues with type 1 diabetes and other community members with type 1 diabetes as well.
Yeah, that it's just such an important reminder, and I think a lot of people will take that away from this, which I hope they will. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was amazing to talk to you. I could talk to you all night, but I will let you go. But thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Krista, for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Wonderful. So thank you for everyone who joined us tonight for our third small talk. It is our last small talk, but we will be back on Sunday. I have a wonderful panel of the future of diabetes research with 3 of Canada's extraordinary scientists. So I hope that you will check that out. It is happening this Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So we hope that today's chat, you enjoyed it. And if you have any feedback, please feel free to let RCI Science know. And if you would like to consider supporting RCI Science's free programming, visit rciscience.ca/donate for more information. We also have a wonderful program that's taking place throughout this year, which is the 100th anniversary of the discovery of insulin, and that is the 100 Lives of Insulin program, where you can check out some amazing profiles on 100 people whose lives have been impacted by the discovery of insulin, including our guest tonight, Dr. Dessi Zaharieva. So again, you can join us this weekend for our last event of Diabetes Awareness Month. And details can be found at RCI Science's website and the Insulin to Innovation website. And for updates on what's next, you can subscribe to RCI Science's newsletter. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Don't forget to like and subscribe.